Over the last year or so, a few people have asked me a particular question, and about 3 or 4 weeks ago, somebody asked me that question again, but it was very specific. Could you please do a video on how to do this? The topic or the game in question is Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars role playing, and the question deals with playing it from the Imperial point of view, playing stormtroopers or, anyway, characters who are functioning members of the Empire, maybe even characters who are being drawn to the dark side or who have already fallen to the dark side. As I've mentioned in the review and other places, this is not a spin on the genre that I personally want to follow. I feel that heroic pulp is called heroic pulp for a reason, and space opera is tied very tightly to that movement so that we can see the heroic embodied in opposition to these dark characters. Now, I don't deny that there is an attraction to playing these dark characters, but that shifts the genre. And as an example of this, we might have the moral but not classically moral conception of Conan, in contrast with the quite amoral and perhaps only accidentally helpful Elric. While Conan and Elric might both be interpreted as fantasy, in Conan we have someone who chooses to do and will face any opposition in order to do that which is right. Whereas with Elric, we are following selfish, self-centered, or in all other ways unpleasant impulses in order to give those stories their momentum, their movement. Elric is, from a certain point of view, a hero, but that point of view paints him as the anti-hero. And if he were asked, rather than being forced into the role of being the eternal champion, who is little better than a tool of fate, then he would refuse. So, Star Wars is about the Conan type character, the hero who rises up against the challenge. When we adopt the role of the villain, we are stepping away from Star Wars and towards something else. Now, I may not be too thrilled about the idea of playing Star Wars from the point of view of an Imperial citizen, but one thing that I really appreciate about this game is how it provides such a clean template for setting up your campaign in the Star Wars universe. You don't have to set it during this time period. You don't have to play it from the perspective of scum and villainy or rebel soldiers or force sensitives. You can do a lot of things with it, and this shows you a quick and easy template for making that happen. And that is something I can get behind 100%. So, if you wanted to take that step, how would you do it? Well, the three games, no matter which one you pick to use as your basis, are already organized in an easy to modify template. They have a period of history. Are you going to use that period of history? They have a series of iconic careers and a further series of specializations attached to those careers. So a lot of the heavy lifting has been done for you. You know you're going to use the system. The gear is all the same. The ships you can pull from wherever. What you really need to think about is, how am I going to present character creation so that the players start off on the right footing to address the nature of our specific Star Wars tale, this time from the point of view of the Empire. So how do the games actually address that? First, they pick iconic species. That's pretty easy. And then they deal with motivations and the obligation, duty, or morality of the character. Now you could keep those, or you could generate your own. I think for a normal imperial citizen living somewhere, you might be able to use obligation just fine. You might give it a new name, or as you go through the different types of obligation that are presented as suggestions, you might think about ways to tweak them specifically for an imperial citizen. Duty, likewise, as a member of the imperial navy or whichever branch of service the characters will belong to, the specific duty rewards, the balance of them might be different. Whereas the rebellion focuses pretty heavily on recruitment and scavenging gear, this is of less importance to an imperial soldier. So maybe other things could be substituted in there. And of course, maybe intelligence and fighting sedition and investigating rumors of rebel cells, these might take on more importance. So duty could be kept but played with. And then morality, if we were dealing with dark force users, Force and Destiny already presents us with all the tools we need to do to play that struggle out on both sides. It's the allegiance to the Empire which we don't have examples of. So the motivations of the character and the mechanic that ties into destiny, obligation, duty, or morality, these things we can adjust to create the feel of the game that we're looking for. The last thing that we need to consider really is the careers and specializations. And again, this is a matter of reskinning or repurposing the material that we already have. Just in some cases, giving it a new name. If we are going for an military-themed Imperial-oriented game, then repurposing what we find in Age of Rebellion will be the fastest way to accomplish that. If we're looking at just Imperial citizens, then maybe moving toward what we find in Edge of the Empire will give us what we need. Especially in the career source books, the different specializations in there. Many of them have the feel of a more typical member of a colony or a more typical citizen of a society, and less focused on the more fringe-worthy characters presented in the Edge of the Empire core rules. But that's up to you. That's taking the existing career and specialization and just adding that Imperial flavor that you're looking for. It really isn't that necessary to completely reinvent the wheel. And I think the greatest amount of thought, if I were to do this, that I would sink into the game would be in answering the question for myself, did I want to use obligation and tailor it more directly toward the Empire, or would I like to create something new? Or if it's a military-themed game, how am I going to assign duty? And will that require adjusting the way duty is presented in Age of Rebellion? It might not be necessary with the particular game that we have in mind. And that's it. We already know the visuals of the Empire. If you don't have a background in the military, if you don't have a background in the history of how these types of civilizations maintain control and enforce their laws, then some research into that will bring more life to your game. If the game is not about exploring the rightness or wrongness of being an Imperial citizen, but simply acting in adventures in the same way that these characters do, but from the Imperial side, how can you bring that feel out? These are the things to consider. What are the reasons for someone to align themselves with the Empire. For someone raised in the Empire, what do they see as the benefits? What are they proud of? Right? At the beginning of Episode 4, A New Hope, Luke is, for all intents and purposes, an Imperial citizen. His allegiance shifts quickly. But until he makes a choice, until he grows up and becomes an active protagonist in his story, he's just a citizen. It's not something he has considered. And this is something to consider as a game master setting up this kind of game. It's not necessary to be a mustache-twirling, evil person just because you're an Imperial citizen. What kind of stories can you tell? There can be all kinds. I've suggested some already, such as losing your allegiance to the Empire and moving toward the rebellion. That could be an interesting story. Or viewing the rebellion as a disruptive force. I think a lot of Imperial citizens would choose security as the primary reason why they would allow the Empire to rise and why they would allow the Empire to continue, because it protects them from threats. They're not aware that these threats are actually as a result of the actions of the Empire, and the Empire is vast. Probably vast regions of it aren't doing anything particularly wrong. Life didn't necessarily change for the largest number of Imperial citizens when the Republic fell and the Empire rose. So, if I were to do an Imperial-themed game, it's from this standpoint that I would begin. And once I had answered these basic questions, then it'll be time to engage the players. Find out specifically in that game what they wanted to do, what careers they're likely to want. And that will help you crystallize your thoughts on how what they're interested in playing meshes with what you're interested in running. And collaborating between these two sources of drive will lead you to your campaign. So I hope this overview of how to reskin Star Wars for your own purposes has been of some use. And I hope it didn't sound too negative about turning the game toward the Imperial point of view. That really isn't my intent. That's just my bias coming out. I do have an attachment to the idea of a hero and of a universe based around the idea of there being a clear right and wrong. There's something strong in those stories. And while we have produced some fantastic literature looking at the point of view of the other side, or the tormented hero, or the anti-hero, it's not something I want to deny. I don't think it should come at the cost of forgetting how to appreciate a hero like a Luke Skywalker. Anyway, I hope this has been useful, and that how you turn this information to your advantage produces games that are a lot of fun.